Hello and welcome once again to Yellow Card TCG. This will here bring you a more regular, basic, down-to-earth deck profile. What deck are we looking at today? Well, as you can probably guess from this very lovely Gamegenic Nations Vault Brandgate deck box, it is a Brandgate deck. If you're interested in the Gamegenic Nations Vault, I actually made a review of it not too long ago, which you can watch up here. There's also a link down in the description. And there's also a giveaway, which if you're watching this in time, you could still win one of these deck boxes for yourself. The deck we're looking at today is Avantgarda. Now, did I build Avantgarda just have a deck that fits in this deck box that wasn't Messiah or Orphist? I will invoke my Fifth Amendment rights on that one. But let's go over the quick build, and I'll also walk you through a few lines of play, as well as some adjustments you can make, and what to look out for in set 10. So, let's get into it. So we'll start off with the ride deck. It's pretty straightforward. You actually don't really have a choice. Well, actually you do. The grade 1, which is Dark Verdict, this doesn't have to be this, but I'll explain that towards the options. But here I'm just running all 4 of the blue Deathsters. The grade 1 and grade 2 search for orders when you ride on top of them, and your grade 3 is your grade 3. And most of the effects, your grade 3 effects need to have this particular starter in Soul. So this is mostly unchangeable apart from this, but again, I'll go that in a second. The main thing, the easy thing to talk about are the trigger lineup. So I'm playing 7 crits, 4 fronts, and some effect heals, which I'll talk about in a moment. The main reason I'm on 7 crit and not 8 is mainly because the deck doesn't have a lot of plussing, you don't have a lot of cards in hand, so every piece of shield is really valuable where you can get it, and 20k fronts obviously have the highest possible, well, base possible shield value, not counting effect heals. And on top of that, because you're a restanding Vanguard, all your pressure is concentrated in your Vanguard column. So you're going to be restanding multiple times, and you're probably, because of that, going to be swinging Vanguard first. You get 3 drive checks, which is more than what most decks get. And so any triggers you get can be more effectively divvied up and distributed across your rear guards. And fronts just help with that a lot. Like, if you're swinging with Vanguard and your opponent goes 2 to pass, hitting a front takes a lot of that pressure off of where you put your triggers. And then any crits would be like, cool, auto Vanguard 2 damage, and your rear guards still have plus 10 to deal with. So overall, I think fronts are just really good. Crits are also equally good. Like, you could play 8 crit 3 front, but here I'm just trying to maximize a shield value. Maximizing crits does give you a little bit more pressure on your Vanguard column, but given how the deck works, you don't actually want that much pressure on your Vanguard column. You want your Vanguard to just be advantage generating, and then you want to find like 1 or 2 crits throughout the game to put onto your rear guards, which then put your opponent in that sort of checkmate, take this 2 damage on 4 and lose, and then the 1 damage can swing at their rear guard sort of. That's the sort of line of play you want to be going for. So I think crits aren't as valuable. And vanilla crits actually are better than the effect crits here, because this deck already generates a lot of soul, it uses a lot of soul, but you have more than enough soul that this doesn't really make up for it. And sometimes the 5k boost onto your Vanguard column does actually make a difference. You could play draws as well. I'm not a huge fan of draws because of A, lower shield value, and B, this is unlike Messiah, or unlike Prison, or unlike Orphist. This isn't a combo deck that's reliant on specific pieces in the main deck. This is just, you're relying on finding orders, which are pretty easy to get, and then your Vanguard does most of the heavy lifting. So at this point, you usually want good cards in your deck, and you don't really care which ones you get as long as you see some of them, and it's pretty easy to see most of them at some point in the game. Overtrigger is overtrigger. Now I'm running a split of heals here because it's largely down to personal preference. I'm expecting a lot of Jet in my local area, and a lot of I'm expecting to go second. So I'm playing the grade heal. I think it's probably the weakest one. You could easily cut this for another vanilla or another crit heal. If you look at the Japanese results, at the time of this video's recording, crit decks are actually being really popular in Japan. You've got Gandeva, you've got Ever itself. There are a few other decks here and there that are gaining crit. I think Drajewed gains a crit. One of the Mask decks gains a crit. That's not Drajewed. But a lot of decks are gaining a crit out of nowhere. And so having 25k shield is really useful for that. In fact, at the time of this video, if you look at Japanese results, you'll see that actually a lot of decks are playing 4 crit counter heals altogether. Which is, they're playing no vanilla heals, which I think is doable but very risky. I still like having these vanilla heals just as bodies. They're also, again, 5k boosters does actually make a huge difference for this deck a lot of the time. But yeah, in terms of like defensive heals and like your split of all vanillas or all crit heals, it doesn't really make a huge impact. It comes up like 1 in maybe 10 games. Again, it's just largely personal preference and what you expect to play against. Then moving on to grade 1 normal units. This one is a bit more easy, I think. You obviously have your PGs. You've got Sanctity here as well, which I'll throw in because it technically counts as a grade 1 PG. You're playing some number of Bobomine. Again, the deck doesn't need the soul, but what it does need is the counterblast. So Bobomine's countercharge is actually really, really useful. We do get countercharge in set 10 in the form of a center column on boost countercharge, which is just as useful because it actually stays on the board. The thing you'll notice as you play this deck is that, like I said, your Vanguard does a lot of the heavy lifting, and so you just need to like have good cards on the board to actually work with. Bobomine takes itself off the board, which means that it's only an 8k booster once. So all of your grade 2s that gain 5k shield, 5k power, and 15k beat sticks, they'll only be hitting for 23 once unless you have multiple Bobomines. There is actually an argument to playing 4. The only downside being that at that point, it then clogs your hand. You need to like constantly repeat themselves, but at some point you won't actually need the countercharge from Bobomine, and then it's just a 5k shield that doesn't provide onboard value. So instead, to counter that, I'm playing 2 copies of the grade 1 Dragon Tree for Brandgate. And this at first doesn't seem that impressive because my Vanguard isn't Dragon Tree and it's not masked, so I can't actually I could make the Dragon Tree marker, but it doesn't do anything. But instead what this card is useful for is that it's an 8k body that stays on the board and replenishes the board. I mentioned that the deck does use a lot of Counterblast, but you've got Bobomine to make up for that, so you can actually play pretty aggressively with the Dragon Tree grade 1 in the early game. In fact, because you search for an order on turn 2 when you ride from grade 1 to grade 2, as long as you have this in your opening hand, it will always be live. You might not want to attack with it on turn 1 because then they can attack into it and then you're down Counterblast, which sucks. But generally, your opponents will always be giving you Counterblast in the early game, which you can then use this on to then search for something like a grade 3 beat stick, a grade 2 beat stick, even a Bobomine, and then put this like this to make a nice 16k. Bobomine refunds this, and you've just put 10k shields worth of pressure on the board on turn 2 for effectively nothing, which is really cool. I could actually consider playing more of these, but right now space is a bit tight because I've got a few other tech options I'm running. But if you wanted to max consistency, then you could easily max out both of these. They're both not awful to have. With Persona Ride and the grade 3 strategy, both of these do hit decent numbers on their own. Obviously, Bobomine needs their boost to actually use this effect, but in a pinch, it can be an 18k beat stick, so there is use there. Grade 2 is where the deck, I think, is the most interesting, because in set 10, there's not really a lot of options. So I'm not playing any of the blue Deathster main deck cards, because I think they're not actually that good. Like, sure, they use Soul, but they don't actually provide that much value to you. Like, if you draw the triangle, these two both gain 5k, these two both add orders to your hand, these two both filter, and these two, they all do something beyond just, a minor plus. Like, they gain power, they get good filtering, this guarantees Persona Ride, all sorts. The actual ratios between these don't matter too much. I will say that the only reason I'm running 3 Freiheit is because I only own 3 Freiheit. If I had a 4th, I would probably cut an Enlightened Age for the 4th Freiheit, because this deck needing its Persona Ride to be able to use Avantgarda skill is mandatory. But the reason that you might not want to play 4 Freiheit is because, again, these guys gain power, Freiheit does not. Freiheit also costs Counterblast, which you like I said, need to use on your Vanguard, you need to use on Aiden, you need to use on the Dragon Tree. So you might not always have the Counterblast to spend on Freiheit itself. Of course, you might need to spend the Counterblast to find the Persona Ride, but if you already have the Persona Ride in hand, then I would rather attack with one of these two than Freiheit. You could also just go 3-3, 3 Pantorai, 3 Enlightened Age, 2 Enlightened Age, 3 Freiheit, 4 Freiheit, 3 Pantorai, whatever. Like, this ratio of grade 2s is fairly flexible, but I do think you want some number of all of them. And the first list I had actually only had just 4 Enlightened Age and 4 Freiheit, and I found that the deck just needed a bit more power. Like, having Enlightened Age as your only 15k beat stick to be boosted by an 8k just wasn't really enough. Like, sometimes you are discarding 8 and Vogel for your ride deck, or sometimes it just gets retired. Even though Vogel is your best beat stick, it only pluses you from deck or drop, whereas this can actually filter. It can dig for PGs, it can dig for Persona Ride if you don't have Freiheit, it can dig for triggers for shield value, which the rest of your plussing engine critically does not do. So I think every one of these three cards has their own value, like their pros and cons, and I think it is actually, for now, largely preference. Obviously, once the Grade 2 promo, which we might not even get in English, comes out, Ara, like some Italian sounding name, I'll put an image on the screen. It'll probably replace Freiheit, because you'll have a much easier time guaranteeing your orders and your Persona Rides, and then you can just dedicate the rest of the deck to being just raw beat sticks. That's Grade 2. Then Grade 3, you've obviously got 3 Persona Rides. You need Avantgarda needs to either hit or Persona Ride to restand, so you want to Persona Ride as much as you can so you don't have to rely on the on-hit. And then I'm playing Vogel because, like I said, this thing is your best beat stick. It hits 18k on its own, which is higher than anything else in the deck. You can't play Combine Rusher because, from my own experience, I found that it's very rare that you have enough orders in the order zone. Like, usually I have between 0 and 1, like on turn 3 and 4. Because on turn 3 you ride, search for 1, play 1 to go up to 2, and then suck 1 in immediately. And then next turn you might not play 1, you might just suck 1 in, because you need to use Cup for your Persona Ride or something along those lines. So having 3 orders in the order zone is actually very rare. So you want something that makes numbers that without needing that amount of orders. Like Abend Robust needs to have 2 of the same name orders, which again is very hard, as you can see, because you're playing such a lean order package. So 18k is probably the best you can do, and it's also got an on-place search for the Grade 3, which again is very relevant because the Grade 3 is your best order, so you'll be able to play the game most effectively from there. Then to the order lineup. Gratias Gradal, again, deck needs the Persona Ride to go off, so the 5th Persona Ride is cool, and because you have orders on turn 2, and you only ever really need 1 order at a time, you can afford to spend turn 4 playing Cup, sucking your last order, and then on turn 5, once you Persona Ride again, play one of the orders that you retrieve or whatever, and go from there. I'm only playing 1 of each Grade 1 and Grade 2, because your ride line searches for them, and it's fine to damage them. Like, if they go to damage or you draw them, then these call themselves out, and you have 3 bodies on the board to put early pressure with. If you damage them, it does kind of suck, because then it means you're not playing an order until the next turn, and you do want, really, like I said, at least 2 orders to give you that buffer of being able to play Cup if you need to. But I'm playing 2 of the Grade 3 order because it is by far the best order in the deck. When you're Persona Riding, when you're going off, it is the most power onto the board. Of course, on turn 3, the Grade 2 is the best one because it gives you the most power straight onto your Vanguard, thus increasing the chance that you would hit. And then the Grade 1 is always nice to have because it's guaranteed field clear, and having a targeted retire in this day and age of Standard is actually really, really good. So before I go into talk about combo lines or lines of play or what you can sort of do, I'd like to talk about a few other options and ratios first of all. The first one, like I mentioned, is the triggers lineup, which is playing effect draws. 3 to 4 is fine, the 8th crit is fine. I just really like fronts because given what the deck is trying to do, which is attack with Vanguard with the pressure and generate additional pressure on the rearguard columns, fronts are the best way of achieving that, in my opinion. The next option is at the Grade 3, which is Abend Robust. You could replace Vogel with it, but like I said, I find that Robust will very rarely get the plus 10k because you need to have 2 orders of the same name, and the only orders of the same name are the Grade 3s. Now you could make up for this by playing multiple copies of the Grade 2 and the Grade 1 orders, and then adding in Robust, but then that's a lot of slots you need to make up elsewhere, like you would need to either cut the Dragon Tree Grade 1, or you would need to maybe like drop Panterai, and then you're playing less good cards for the sake of fewer good cards, if that makes sense. Like, cutting 2 Panterai and 2 of the Grade 1 Dragon Tree to fit in 2 copies of Abend Robust and 2 more of each order, you're going from 4 beat sticks to 2 beat sticks. And even though the quality of the beat stick is higher, in a deck like this, I think you care more about the quantity of beat sticks than the quality. The next option is increasing the counts of Bobomine and the Grade 1 Dragon Tree. I like both options. Again, it just comes down to what are you cutting for them. You're going to eat into your Grade 2 lineup, which I think is wrong because your Grade 2s are your better beat sticks. Like, having 15k attackers without boosters is better than having 8k bodies that don't hit without Persona Ride. So sometimes you will miss Persona Ride, and obviously when you miss Persona Ride, you basically don't get to play the game because your opponent will just guard your Vanguard swing and nothing else does anything. But in those instances, at least you can still like 15k to swing at the rear guards and take down their attackers. And the last option is something that I actually like considered very aggressively for a long time, and I just couldn't really find the slots for it, which is Secondel. So Secondel could theoretically replace like one Bobomine or like the Dragon Tree grade 1. The issue is that you're not really recycling grade 3s. Like the grade 3s that are going to be in your drop are going to be your Vogels, which you don't really want to put back into the deck because you don't need to use them the way you would something like, say, Ava would. Or your Orders, which, again, like you don't need to recycle them because you can already add them back with either Vogel or Enlightened Age Dragon. And putting them back into the deck just to search for them again, like with the Vogel, just seems kind of pointless. Like, sure, he's an 8k booster the same way that the Dragon Tree grade 1 is, and he draws you a card, which the Dragon Tree grade 1 doesn't do, but unlike the Dragon Tree grade 1, he's not reusable. The only benefit is that his Soul Blast 3 cost is going to be a lot more easily paid than the Dragon Tree grade 1's Counterblast 1. So those are the options there. Now, I mentioned at the beginning when I talked about the ride line that there is some flexibility in the grade 1 ride line option, and that is to do what Gravidia does and play Rutus in your grade 1 ride line slot and main deck one copy of Eclipse Moonlight, so that on turn 1 you search for the Eclipse Moonlight, and then on turn 2 you play the Moonlight to make a 15k beat stick, and then on turn 3 when you ride Avantgarda over Stelvane, you can still search for this, which then gives you the strategy to put into Soul for Avantgarda's cost, and you still either have a 15k beat stick on turn 2 to do things with, or you have a 15k booster, which is just really, really sick in general. And yes, there is definitely value to having a 15k booster, don't get me wrong, I like the idea a lot as well. My concern is that this is a brick in the deck the rest of the time. Like, you know, there are times where you'll open the grade 1 strategy or you'll damage it, and you won't be able to search for it. Obviously, Rutus is search on place, not search when ridden over, so the chance of that happening is way lower, but there will still be times where you won't be able to actually search the world for whatever reason. In that case, Rutus doesn't call himself out of the soul as a beat stick, unlike this, which is always going to be an 8k booster, which is great. And the second thing is that when you go turn 1 search this, turn 2 play this, turn 3 go into Avantgarda search for this, once you put this into Soul for Avantgarda's cost, you then need to hit a strategy every single turn for the rest of the game to be able to actually go for the restand. And sure, that is semi-doable because you have search in the form of Vogel. You know, if you have the grade 1 already in hand, you can discard and add it back with Enlightened Age. You could just naturally draw into them over the course of the game. That is doable. But I think it's just not reliable enough to be worth the while. And yes, the deck does need as many good boosts as it can get. And a 15k Shadow Army behind a Vogel is a very, very, very scary and cool column. But again, I think that having the safety net of having both strategies is just super useful, especially the grade 1, like I mentioned. Being able to just retire things on a whim, obviously useless against Ava, but against most other decks, being like, okay, turn 3, I don't actually need to restand right now because I can only make one attacker and it's this, Freiheit, which is going to search for Persona Ride. I'm instead going to use this to draw the card off of the Vanguard skill and retire your rear guard, so that's already a +2, and then still get some decent attacks in, and just threaten the restand, basically force you to block when I don't really need to restand to begin with because I'm not putting on that much pressure. And then you can save preventing intercepts and preventing blitz orders when you actually want to go for the kill, and again, don't have the grade 3 order for whatever reason. Like, I think this is fine. I haven't really tested it myself, but again, these are the reasons that I would rather just play the pure ride line than going for a tech. Going into set 10, there are two main cards you need to be aware of. One is the grade 1 with counter charges, which more or less just replaces Bobomine, because it's a 10k booster all the time for your Vanguard column. And the second will probably replace Pantorai, which is the grade 2 promo that gains 5k if you have an Avantgarda, and can then also put an order on top of your deck, which is very cool. So you use it, stack an order, and then you drive check it or draw it with one of your other draw effects. But I will probably make another video when set 10 releases in English about the updates you can do for this deck as a follow-on, so If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for when that comes out. And yeah, that's gonna be it here. Oh wait, nope, combos. I almost forgot. Let's do that. So, I say combos, but there's not really... This deck isn't really a combo deck. It's more like a mid-range tempo sort of deck. Kind of like Overlord or Lutetia, where you don't need specific pieces, you just need to find any piece and go from there. Like, what you'll mainly be doing is using Avantgarda to put an order into Soul, swinging with Vanguard, getting your drive checks, counterblasting 1, discarding 1, restand, swing again, get another drive check, trigger to your rear guards, and go from there. The main combos you need to be aware of is how you sequence your various effects. Like, for example, if you have nothing here, you can play an order first to counterblast 1 for the grade 1, find something, call it, continue, and then afterwards put that order into Soul with Avantgarda to do things. Alternatively, you can do it the other way around, where you can put the order into Soul first, and then play either Vogel or the Enlightened Age to Soul Blast the order you just put in and add it back either with Enlightened Age or if it's the grade 3 order with the Vogel. A lot of it is just sequencing and knowing how to manage and utilize your resources, like how you can make good columns. Like, for example, I've had times where I've had the Dragon Tree on the board and its effect found me a Vogel, and I used Vogel to add a grade 3 order, which I could then play for next turn. Then next turn, I Persona Road, and at this point, I managed to drive check Pantarai and a Enlightened Age, which is cool. And the thought is, okay, I could use the Dragon Tree grade 1 again to filter out my deck, or I could just call over this with something that actually, digs something I need now, hits numbers, just as good as numbers as the Vogel, and actually then intercepts with 5k shield. In those cases, you would play the order, counterblast 1, look at top 5, and maybe I find like a Bobelmine or something, or maybe like a Freiheit to search for another Persona for next turn. It's okay to replace things, as long as the thing that you're replacing already got you some amount of value, and you're continuing to generate value after that. Those are the main things you need to be aware of. Like, every card in this deck needs to at least have provided 2 lots of value. Searching for an order is not enough. It needs to search for an order and attack. Countercharging is not enough. It needs to have boosted to make numbers and then countercharged. Draw 1, discard 1 is not enough. It needs to make numbers, or making numbers is not enough. It needs to draw 1, ditch 1 to find Persona Ride or find PGs or what have you. It's all about knowing which piece do you need right now, and which of your cards in hand get you closer to that line. So again, it's one of those things where you really have to play the deck and know what your opponent's deck does to be able to comfortably know, okay, I can guard here, I can rush here, I can play aggro here, because you're always going to be swinging Vanguard, well, trying to swing Vanguard twice. That's how you win the game. The question more is, do you need this body in your hand to guard with 5k shield, or are you okay to commit it and attack with it, knowing that it might get retired, and push your opponent to that 4 or 5 damage where you can then threaten lethal? And that's something that will only really come with experience. And like I said, this is a new deck. People still don't know what exactly it does. People are still learning to play around it. The answer is A, Damage and I. If they don't have the Bobelmine, they can't use Avantgarda. But be aware that Bobelmine behind Avantgarda procs at the end of the battle, not on hit. So they can, if you have no counterblast open, and they go, okay, cool, you can't use Avantgarda, I'll no guard. You hit. You can then use Bobelmine first to go into Soul to countercharge, and then Avantgarda to counterblast that you now have because you hit to restand. So do be aware of that. In fact, some instances, if you Persona Road instead, you might even just have a column here, and even though you're playing fronts, you'll just swing with this first, get the value, get the Bobelmine, and then swing twice to put all your triggers on whatever's on the other column. That's also an option. The second way to play around this deck is to just really guard aggressively. The first grade 3 turn is always on hit, not guaranteed. So if you can guard that, they lose a lot of their potential. Because this deck can't close games out of nowhere. Nothing else has inherent crit pressure, nothing else makes unguardable numbers, there's no guard restrict. All it does is 38k twice, and then maybe some big-ish rear guards. If you fully guard the first grade 3 turn, sure, you'll only be stuck at 1 or 2 damage, and you might be unable to play the game. but you won't need to guard their like other turns as aggressively. You can just guard their Vanguard, take the crit rear, and then clap back with everything, what your combos or what your regular aggression is. And I guarantee you, most of the good decks in the format nowadays have a much better aggression than Avantgarda. The deck is still fun, it's just not amazing, and it's actually very easy to play around. Like, I wouldn't bother like killing the board, because like I mentioned, they don't care about like the quality of what they have on the board. They just care about having enough bodies that they can actually make numbers. So, and they'll always be able to make numbers, but then if you pay attention to their drive check and they drive check 3 triggers, they might not have any normal units in hand, and then it might be a good idea to go after their board and go from there. There's a lot of to be aware of. Playing around it, just keep track of what your opponent has and what they could do, and just don't give them the value that they could get from potential on-hit restand, basically. And at the same time, staying on low damage also involves the skill of not damage denying yourself. So, if you need to have counterblast to play the game, maybe take a rear guard instead where you can. Consider things like that. But yeah, that's basically it for here. It's a very basic overview. Just tell you like how to play, what to look for, what to prioritize, what to focus on. Like I said, I will be doing a follow-up how to upgrade video when we get set 10 in English, so stay tuned for that. Again, thank you again to the lovely Gate deck box for Game Genning that I can now fill with a Brand Gate deck. Please check out the video down in the description and join the giveaway. But until then, I've been Zistral with Yellow Card TCG. As always, reaping engagement from liking the video, leaving a comment, etc, following us on social media. That's gonna be it for now. Take care, goodbye.